I'm going to imagine that the interest in VR is actually quite greater than the number of people in the room, and I'm going to blame the Amaze opening party for and the strike, I guess, for the lack of people coming in to hear about VR. So there's been a lot of hype and buzz and interest in VR, perhaps more so in North America than in Europe per se. And a lot of it has been much more so on the technical side of things. So in terms of how the technology works and what you can do with it, and it's been out long and been available for development and to play with for quite some time. And so with this panel, we thought the idea of talking to some developers and creators who have actually done stuff with VR and get a sense of their experiences, not only from a development and technological point of view, but also business and design side. So quite a broad range of activity. And so we're going to have a kind of a lively discussion. If there's any questions from the audience as we go, you're more than welcome to throw up your hand, and we'll include you into the discussion, and we'll just take it from there. So very fortunate to have a very interesting panel of developers and creators who have done a bunch of different stuff with VR so far, and so we'll just kind of go down the line and hear a bit about who they are and what they've done recently with VR. Daniel, we can start with you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel from VR Bits. We're a small indie studio from Dresden and currently also Australia, Canberra, because my fellow developer Mark moved for his studies to Canberra University. And we're making Darkfield VR. It's a small space shooter-like, especially for virtual reality. So currently we have a fallback mode for normal displays, but we are targeting virtual reality only. Yeah, and that's what we do for now. There's a small other game for Gear VR as well called Nighttime Terror. So it's a small miniature shooter-like game.
Harald?
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Harald Krefting. I'm from AKQA here in Berlin, but I used to work for our London office before. AKQA is a digital agency, so we're more like in the advertising industry and not necessarily gaming. And we have a lot of global clients, so we're looking at how we can use VR to solve their problems and develop services and products for them. And recently we did a project for Nissan, and that was launched at the Tokyo Motor Show, where people could use the VR headsets at a motor show to design their future car based on certain choices in a virtual environment. And that was our first project to get the VR headsets into people's hands and also see their reactions, how they react to it, and talk to them. We launched that on 4 different motor shows around the globe and managed to get like a few thousand people to go through them. So that gives a lot of insights what can be done with VR outside of just necessarily gaming.
Good morning, I'm André from Razer, basically representing open source virtual reality, or in short OSVR, which was launched at CES this year. It's an open platform for developers, both on hardware and software side, to get in touch with VR and get it started basically for them. So far, like we started in January with about 18 companies partnering for OSVR. We're now over 90, ranging from giant companies like Ubisoft to smaller one-team studios or VR Bits, for example. So yeah, it's we're just getting started with the business. We are providing visibility to indie developers starting in VR, and also try to drive the technology and develop a lot of business there.
Good morning, I'm Ville from Mindfield Games. I'm there as a CEO and tech coder, and we're working on our first-person exploration game called Pollen, which will be released later this year for PC, and it's highly optimized for Oculus Rift. So we're a small studio based in Helsinki, about 10 strong right now, and we also are working on a yet unannounced Gear VR product as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much, guys. You know, when I explore new technologies, I tend to think of three areas. One being the design side of things, one being the technological side of things, and the third being the business side of things. I think most of the discussions around VR have been with regards to the first two elements, the design and technology. You know, we hear less about the business in part because the VR market really hasn't been established quite yet. So I actually want to start with the business side because I think, you know, that's where there is some hesitation from the development community because it's unclear what the real business potential is or the business opportunity or opportunities are. So we'll start the discussion more so on the business side of things. And I suppose for, I guess it's Ville and Daniel, I mean, you're working on games that are not yet on the market and you're sort of anticipating the commercial release of the various VR headsets. I mean, how do you manage the timing from a business point of view and also justifying, you know, working on games now without that, call it the market or the install base being there yet?
Yeah, so if I start, for us it's actually quite easy to approach VR markets because Pollen is a game that can be played without VR headsets as well. So we already have a player base of 100 million players, which is a quite nice market size. And of course, we want to wait a bit for the VR headsets to become well, more mainstream and more common. But right now there are over 200,000 DK1s and 2s on the market. So there is already a small market of players waiting for content.
Yeah, so because we are obviously a multiplayer space shooter, we are just a small fish in the sea currently. We're targeting VR only, so currently there is practically no market aside from the DK2s that are out there. So, but because this is our first game and we're just starting making games, get out of university, we can wait until the public release of the Oculus or the HTC or Sony Morpheus. So we hope, of course, we hope that this breaks through next year and everyone gets into VR. And I think this will be the case.
Well, I guess I mean, Harald, I mean, your sort of business side is a little bit different since you're selling more so to kind of the commercial space, like Nissan and stuff. So give us a sense of how that's different from a business point of view.
Yeah, I think we're in a lucky position that we don't really have to sell and don't have to rely on the units being available. We get paid directly by our clients, so that makes it a bit easier. But at the same time, there are not any headsets widely distributed, so we have to rely heavily at the moment on like an installation type of presenting these things at motor shows or like events or in a retail space. But that also is a good opportunity for us because then we can look for dialogues with people using it. So we're not just sending a download link out and then have to figure out how people use it and what they like. And in the Nissan example, that was really helpful for us because we asked people afterwards to describe how they experienced it, and they weren't necessarily telling us what they saw so much. They didn't tell us like, yeah, I saw a car and I did this. They explained a lot like how they felt and about the emotions that it triggered. Like, I felt really like a bit nauseous when I was up on the cliff, and I felt really like I was high. So it was quite interesting for us and made us realize that we're just kind of, that it's actually a bit of a new medium that opens more possibilities than just like a hardware gadget.
Very good. And André, I mean, to what extent is the Open Initiative addressing some of the business questions?
It's at the moment the absolute focus of the project itself, especially with the platform being completely open and also the headset being completely open. We're trying to solve the hand and egg problem that's currently the main reason why there's no market. In the beginning of each and every new technology, you have to first create a software base and a hardware base at the consumer, and with bringing together both hardware and software developers, we're quite efficiently working on solving this. It still take 2-3 years, something like this, before we can actually see a commercial market. We know it's there. Like a year ago, Oculus got bought, which proved that there's a commercial market for VR. And with establishing an open platform where everybody can participate, we're going in the best direction there. For example, OSVR is completely hardware agnostic, so you can use it with our own headset, you can use it with the Oculus and whatever's on the market. And that's just giving the developers the freedom to not develop for a single-minded, close or small market, but just opens up the full potential with the years.
And currently it's very nice for developers as well, because we have an early access version of Darkfield out there. And the only one who's testing right now are early adopters and developers themselves. So it's very nice, you get very nice bug reports of problems. You don't have to deal with some things normal players would do, like, oh no, my mouse didn't work in your game or stuff like that. They are already very technical when they send us bug reports, so it's very nice to work with these guys.
Well, but, I mean, that does bring up an interesting challenge, though, in that, I mean, to the extent you want your game to be released for a larger consumer audience, and the hope, certainly, you know, if Oculus or any of the other devices are going to sell at a mass market scale, not everyone's going to be a hardcore user. But that also sort of dovetails on what Harald said in terms of the unexpected feedback you were getting from users who were expressing how they felt, and, you know, getting a glimpse of a new medium and a new way to design. So, I mean, maybe Daniel, you can start based on your efforts with the early access version, but are you getting surprising feedback? I mean, other than, oh, it crashed and, you know, sort of standard just software buggy stuff, but in terms of user experience, what kind of stuff are you hearing at this point?
Currently, we're getting no nausea-like bug reports, like, oh, your game is too fast, or I'm rotating too fast. So no problem with that. But aside from that, it's only the usual things. Often it is a problem with the Oculus himself, because of the SDK. The first versions were very buggy. It gets better, but the other things are, this is the thing which brought me to VR in the first place, because of it's such a new technology, and there are ways we we have to do or think in ways which no one does before, or no one did before, and there's so much to learn and so much to research. So this is a very interesting topic to start with.
Okay, but I mean, so the player feedback has been sort of very positive in that sense.
Of course, it was positive from the game. Likewise with the Oculus. Likewise.
Ville, how about in terms of your efforts? To what extent has Pollen been played by DK2 users and, you know, other people out there?
Yeah. So we had Pollen first public demo at this year's GDC and PAX East, where people were free to play it, and actually the feedback was quite positive. Of course, because we have a first-person game, which is a VR game, the nausea issue is especially important for us, because, well, our game type is the game that causes it the most easily. But so far, what I've seen is that the hardware will be there, the consumer hardware, to be to enable software to be as nausea-free as possible. It's not anymore up to hardware to, or it's not hardware anymore that causes the nausea. It's the software only. And there are quite many ways to deal with nausea, like how you move the player and so forth. It's just a huge amount of issues that you need to take care of, especially for a first-person game. But we've been quite happy and surprised how well people have played Pollen, even with DK2, without getting too sick or so forth. But of course, there is a small amount of players who will get sick no matter what. So we actually like to compare Pollen a bit like to a roller coaster. I mean, you have lots of people who are really enjoying it, and then you have few people who just puke every time. But still, it's like, for most of the people, it's really, really enjoyable and fun time.
As developer, you now have much more responsibility to your players, because now you just not have to make them a good time or have them play a good experience, but also not to let them throw up. So
So if I can continue, for example, you get these whole new issues like stairs. And whereas normally you have stairs in game, you can go back and forth, that's no issue. But in VR, if you have stairs and people go back and forth, they will get sick. But try to do that in real life. I mean, you will get sick. So the problem is that player is able to do things much more easily, which will cause motion sickness in real life as well. So it's quite hard to avoid that, and you actually need to take it all the way to level design to try to make it impossible for player to get sick from those issues.
Is there any other design considerations than whether someone will puke or not? I mean, it seems like there should be more to worry about with the power that VR gives you.
Yeah, I mean, the list of issues that you need to take care of, it's just huge.
Yeah.
I think we don't have enough time to go through that list here.
Right. Well, I mean, Harald, maybe we can go back to you and some of the stuff you did. I mean, so you're generally not doing pure games in that sense. You're doing all these other experiences. I mean, what kind of new experiences is it opening up for you in the kind of work that you're able to do?
Well, whenever we get technology and new technology and look at it, we always try to find what we call the insights. So we try to figure out what does this technology allow you to do now that wasn't previously possible and what you couldn't do before. So with VR, it just gives you this unprecedented sense of presence, and no other medium can do that. And you get a good sense for scale, and you can put someone in an environment that's not accessible for them. So we have a few clients like from the car industry, so they're very excited about the possibilities of placing people into cars without actually having the physical car accessible, like the Nissan one, where it's a car that's not even been built. So there's a lot of talks going on at the moment, and see where it's been useful, but what we always try to avoid is just having a technology and then start searching for a problem. So we always have the problem first and then look at the technology that can solve that.
I mean, maybe this is for everyone to consider, but the expectations of the users. I mean, is it still so kind of unknown that they have no idea what to expect and they just put the headset on and are wowed, or you think you're dealing with a certain set of expectations people have as they come to a VR game or VR experience?
Well, we launched it at motor shows and people didn't have any experience with it, so there's a bit of a novelty factor that's quite powerful then, and you just put people on the headsets. What we found, and we launched at different continents, so with certain markets, our first launch was in Japan, and in Japan, stereoscopic headsets they were quite popular for watching movies, but they didn't have the head tracking, so we had to teach people that they can actually look around, because we found that the first people just put the headset on and just keep staring straight forward, because that's what they were used to. So we had to introduce like a little hummingbird that whizzes around at the beginning as like a little tutorial to teach people that they actually can look around. So there's a few of these things that you just have to take into consideration. You have to teach people how to use the medium in some ways, because it hasn't been done before.
Well, and Ville, how about at PAX? I mean, that's a sort of a geek gamer crowd, so you'd think some of them may even have headsets and are more familiar. I mean, was it a similar experience from the car show?
Yeah, actually, like majority of people at PAX and even at GDC hadn't tried any headset before, so we actually had to teach them how to use it, and they were quite astonished like how it feels and how it looks, and just the immersion. So it was actually quite easy to like give this nice first experience of VR with our game, and when it actually some people at GDC who had tried VR headsets before were on the other hand happy that we had a game that actually allowed you to move around. So for those people who had tried the headsets before, it was they were actually expecting more stuff already, like because Oculus and HTC Vive demos, they were basically just stand and look around demos or move in a small area. So basically they didn't allow the player to be really free in a way. So when they tried our game and hey, you can move freely, this is so awesome. So people already start to expect more when they have tried the headsets.
And, I mean, André, in terms of the open initiative efforts, I mean, how much of it is regarding sort of design or experience design as opposed to just sort of technical implementation?
Quite a lot, since we're working with already a couple of developers which are giving a lot of feedback. It's pretty great to see, like, for the most companies we're working with, they're focusing on like what Ville just described, like on-spot experiences, especially games where you drive a car or where you fly a ship or something like this, where you as a player are also physically based in a chair or something, are quite comfortable and quite easy to solve. And also, the new opportunities with VR aren't just the pictures, it's also the direct interaction of a human body, like without a tool, with a game, with a software, or an application in any shape or form. So we see a lot of creativity coming up there, with things like leap motion, for example, where you can just use your natural hands in a game and get them displayed and all this kind of thing. So it gives an absolute new aspect to designing, which is absolutely unrivaled by just watching at a screen or sitting in front of a screen. And the feedback there is super valuable to us, both from developer side or also on shows like QUO VADIS or Gamescom. Or to your previous question, we also have a lot of feedback that people are actually know about what is a head-mounted display, but they haven't tried it so far, so it's pretty much the same everywhere. Like, people are just experiencing this for the first time and they absolutely love it or they absolutely hate it. Like, both sides are present, and it's fun to see, to hear how they describe the experiences and to develop upon this.
So let's spend a moment on the technical side of things in terms of the actual technology and the efforts to develop for it. Any big surprises? I mean, let's say when you first unwrapped your dev kits and started building your games and experiences, any sort of surprises or real gotchas or things to watch out for?
I was just overwhelmed, so I picked it up and tried it the first time, I don't know, at a friend of mine who backed DK1. And I was totally overwhelmed, and I still am. There are some experiences which are always the same. Currently you get only some demos, downloadable demos, not real games. But from time to time there are great experiences, and I always have to love and or be overwhelmed from that. So from technical standpoint, things like the low persistence or the thing HTC is doing with their camera sensors and the passive stations, there are things I didn't consider. So it's getting better and better, obviously. My fellow developer tried all the free big headsets, not the Razer currently, but he will do this as well, I think. And he said there's currently no difference, so every headset can be shipped to customers.
Okay, can you, I mean, I'm not a programmer, but can you describe a little bit more of those two issues, the persistence and...
Yeah, from the low persistence side, basically what's the display inside the Rifts doing, they show you the image just for a few milliseconds or nanoseconds, I don't know, and then gets black. So on every frame it just shown a little time and then it gets black. You didn't see this because your eyes too lazy to see this fast shuttering of the picture. But what you get is when you move your head, you do not get this blurry images like caused of the reaction time of the monitors. So this is what gamers want: fast, responsive displays. And with this technique, you get totally smooth and sharp images, even when you move your head very fast. The other thing, what was the other thing?
I think you said HTC was doing something.
The Vive sensor. Oculus currently doing positional tracking with infrared LEDs, and they target these infrared LEDs at the headset with a camera in front of you, and HTC is doing it the other way around. So the headset sensors, there are photo sensors on it, I think, and they are active. And inside your room there are some stations who pulsing or do a laser which pulses, and with these pulses the the sensors are, the headset knows where it is in the room. So yeah, it's very accurate and not so much a problem with light coming from your window or stuff like that.
Any other sort of technical surprises or issues that?
I mean, of course, the biggest technical challenge is to hit the frame rate, which is frame rate requirements of the headsets, and that will be close to like 90 hertz. So your game needs to run 90 frames per second with a resolution that is higher than full HD in the final versions. And still, like, I think most of the players expect the graphics to be at the same quality as with the traditional flat screen game. So it's quite hard actually to have the same graphics, render it in with two cameras, and even with higher frame rate and higher resolution. So that's, I think, for us, definitely the biggest challenge.
Harald?
Well, we found that graphical fidelity is not so important in VR as long as everything's consistent. That's, I think, the most important thing, that things are in scale and everything's properly, because there's this, in 2D you can cheat by scaling things and moving them around, and in 3D and designing in 3D environment, you just simply can't do these things anymore because they become immediately obvious and just kind of break the immersion. So it's probably better to just scale the graphical fidelity down a bit in favor of frame rates and keep everything, keep a consistent look, and that can be stylized. People don't care too much about photorealism. We have a lot of people asking immediately, like, how realistic can this look like? And then we put them into a little comic demo where you're just the size of a rabbit, and people just get it and believe it. So it's so powerful that actual photorealism doesn't matter so much as people might think in the first time.
Well, unless you're Nissan and you want your cars to look like the real cars. But
yeah, I mean, reality is boring, right? So that's all about VR. So take you to places that you can't go before. So you don't want to see places that you can just visit really next door.
But the shiny metal painting.
André, I mean, in terms of technical issues, what stuff comes up most in terms of the, what you're seeing?
Yeah, well, we spoke about the software side already. So another quite big thing is like interaction in an environment that you basically can't see at the moment. Also, the ergonomic factors of a headset are still not there where it should be. So like it's something you can wear maybe for an hour or something, but it's getting heavier and heavier, and to really drive an immersive experience like Poland, for example, over like 2, 3, 4 hours. There's still a lot of improvement that needs to be done. Also, interaction with current human interface devices isn't very natural. For example, with a controller or something, it always feels a bit like it's okay to have a tool in your hand in general, but it just feels like wrong for you to walk around with a controller instead of like just moving around, because it just feels surreal. There are quite some technical things that still have to advance, and that are quite interesting to solve from a technological point of view.
Cool. By the way, if folks have any questions, feel free to put your hand up, and we'll incorporate that into the discussion. In terms of, I mean, maybe this is more of a meta question, but I'm particularly fascinated by Ville in terms of being a Finnish developer working on VR and not mobile free-to-play. And to what extent is there kind of regional biases, and where are we seeing the most VR interest or development? I mean, are you the only one in Finland that's sort of playing with VR?
Well, we're the only company in Finland. There are actually quite many, 1 or 2 guy hobby projects, at least in Finland. But globally, I think there aren't that many actual companies. There are loads and loads of small indie studios and so forth. But yeah, it's still quite small industry. Except I think California is quite big in VR. There are lots of meetings there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just because someone was mentioning it, the LA VR meetup group, I think they've like quadrupled in size every other month or something like that. I think the most recent meetup in Los Angeles was 2,000 people, which seems ridiculous. So.
We just had our Finnish VR meetup, and I think we had 60 people there.
60? Well,
And
that's
Cologne as well.
Cologne?
60 or 100 people around about.
Right, right. So, I mean, maybe you guys are more sort of localized here in Germany. I mean, what's your sense of the, call it regional interest in VR?
I found it very funny when Mark from golem.de emailed me, hey, you are the Germany's specialist in virtual reality, so why don't you want to have the talk at QUO VADIS? I had to laugh because yeah, I never imagined me as a specialist in virtual reality because I thought there are many other people doing VR out there. And yeah, I think in Germany there aren't just that many who doing a VR game. So yeah, it's quite a small business currently.
Well, I guess, Harald, your scope is sort of a bit different.
Well, I just recently moved to Berlin, so all the other work was done from our London office. It helped us actually because we needed to get a few certain skill sets in that we didn't have in the agency, so it helped us to tap into the VFX industry that's quite heavily in London. So you have a lot of like 3D freelancers working there. That was quite helpful. So I can't say too much about the Berlin or the German market, to be honest.
André, I'm guessing you have a bit of a wider sort of view of things.
Yeah, well, with the Razer's main offices being close to LA, we've been actually at the show and got quite good feedback there for Europe in general. I'd say, especially in Germany, people, no matter if they're engineers or developers, are kind of conservative at the moment. Like, they're waiting for a commercializing process.
Investors as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something like if you don't know if you can sell something there, why should you take the risk? And why should you devote like a huge part of your life, your working life, your professional life, into this direction? We see more avid movement around other countries in Europe. For example, Poland is quite savvy in VR. You have a huge part, especially in France, which are both on university sides as well as establishing companies. So I think Germany especially has to step it up a bit. Though I absolutely understand if you don't want to take the risk at the moment. So it's a thing that I'm expecting to see in 2016.
Well, when I guess most people. So let's actually just see who in the room is actually doing VR work. A few of you, and how many are sort of doing work and or just dabbling with the technology. All right, a couple more. All right, the others are just spectators.
Who owns a VR headset? Okay.
Yeah, now we can't match who to put their hand up at each. It's
I
like,
actually
who
can't
owns
see
one and
anything, so.
Yeah.
More people owning than using them, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Well, so I mean, certainly you guys have taken some risks, as we said at the beginning, to kind of get started to work on projects and so on. I mean, what kind of advice would you give someone who is thinking about either adding VR to an existing game, so a bit, with Pollen, like it's not only VR, or just sort of going down the VR path? What kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, actually, for most of the games, I wouldn't advise in plugging in the VR afterwards, because generally that's a bad idea. So, just like for example, iPad games, you just shouldn't convert your traditional first-person shooter to iPad with touchpads or the stick touch controls, whatever. It just doesn't work that well. And the same applies for VR. So when you do a VR game, you should firstly design for VR, and if you're lucky, and then you might be able to port it to a traditional flat screen. Well, some games you can port quite easily, like driving games and space shooters and so forth. The game seated experiences, because well, you sit in those games, and it's relatively easy to just add the headset support. Of course, you need to take care of some interactions and so forth, but it's easier than to port your traditional shooter game.
But even for this type of games, perhaps you did some hacks or tricks which worked in 2D, but didn't work in 3D, and especially with head tracking. So this is what Harald said in the first place. Correct world scale is so much important. We have a problem, for example, inside our game there's a helmet which is just centimeters away from your head, but at the same time you can look hundreds and hundreds of miles away in the asteroid field. So this is something you would usually do with a little trick in 2D, but in 3D it has to be this Z-buffer scale. So yeah, that's the thing what you have to consider at when designing a game and not afterwards.
Go on.
But usually a good way when doing a new game is obviously talking to people who already did this kind of stuff. The Oculus forums, the Unity forums when you were doing with the Unity engine, they are all helpful, especially Oculus SDK engineers are so much helpful and so fast at responsive times currently. So yeah, no problem with that at all.
Harold, anything to add in terms of your experience?
Yeah, just don't add technology for the sake of adding it. Like, really think of what benefit does it give to the user and what problem does it solve. So otherwise, no point really to do that.
André, I don't know if this is sort of an appropriate question, but do you see, I mean, a bit to Ville's point, where developers are mainly just doing their games and then they're going to at some point go grab the VR stuff and sort of make it VR versus starting the game with VR in mind and thinking about those unique experiences? I mean, is that something you kind of get a view on?
What Daniel and Ville said is quite right. Like there are certain games which are easy to adapt to VR in general, but I'd suggest to think VR and design from ground up in this direction, especially in entertainment software, which is like a totally different application than something more an advertising side of things. So it's definitely pioneering work. It's definitely something that's hard to do because there aren't many resources. There are many people working together to achieve this, as already described, and it's a perfect direction. Or it's a perfect time now to think about what you want to have in 5 years, because it will take you time to develop and to adapt to the new conventions that VR brings to you. But it will be really satisfying for you to be sure to pioneer uncharted waters with your products and games and applications.
Exciting. Any questions from the audience? I mean, certainly, yeah, go ahead.
I think that's the cool thing in VR. We actually have problems with the rolling kind of movement and always the yawing kind of movement. So these are the things which make people sick. And as developers, it's our task to get around these by finding new mechanics to make this happen, to actually let this work. And there are some kinds of things like developers do tricks like only let people move 45 degrees or 10 degrees steps. So this actually, the nausea is gone when you do some rotating around. This is obviously not a cool way to control a shooter, but these are the things where people let the people start finding new things to get around these problems, and this is what makes virtual reality interesting.
Yeah, and actually Poland doesn't involve any shooting because when we were in prototyping phase, we noticed that at this point it's really, really difficult problem to solve, so that it's fun to play. So we decided to drop the shooting part from our first-person game.
But also, if you start development for VR now, don't think about the hardware as it is right now. That's something for you to check, for something to you to feel your game, to see your design work, and to just verify your work. Think ahead. Like, we see a lot of movement on the technical side and improvements, and I'm pretty sure that in 5 to 10 years we will have totally different headsets, being half transparent, being light wide, and also more engaging and easier to use. So as said, it's pioneering right now, so don't expect what you do today is still valid tomorrow. That's why you should start early.
And like the most important part is that now that we have headsets, the next step will be the controllers. So in the future we will have Move controllers and HTC controllers and whatnot. So for example, making a sword game is much easier in the future.
And cooler.
Any other questions? Comments? No? So I mean, I think there is this sort of timing question. We talked a little bit about it in the context of the business. You know, when is the right time to jump in? Right? Because I think there's certain studios that are already deep in and they're anticipating the sort of the imminent release of the headsets and the market will materialize. But then there's others that are waiting on the sidelines. I mean, then if you look at what André just said, it's like, you know, we're looking at 5 years and everything's going to change. So I mean, it seems a bit difficult from a planning point of view. You guys, you know, everyone here sort of jumped in early. You know, is it too early, too late? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's always the problem with new technology, especially we know this from consoles peripheral. When there are new peripherals out there, you can't get customers to buy the new thing besides their consoles, and it's just like that. So hopefully VR gets this big and gets customers so excited that they buy these headsets, and I think it's time. So there is a big cake of virtual reality, and there's still some pieces of the cake you can grab today when you start now developing for virtual reality. Also, I think there are many niches you can get. Games no one ever thought about are now possible in VR when you just have a good idea which just doesn't work with a normal monitor, but with virtual reality you can grab a big piece of the cake.
Also, when you're quoting me with in 5 years or something, it's more on the technical side of view. Like, I can see the commercialization of the market within the next 2-3 years. But also, it's like designing for VR is generally that you just need more work to do than to do, for example, a 2D mobile game or something. So creating content and being 3D, designing, all these kind of things take way longer. So it's good to start now than you're not going to do VR within one day. So that's...
Right, fair point. Ville?
And the reason why we are there so early is that, well, firstly we are gamers, and when we tried Oculus DK1, we were just so sold and really wanted to do our next game for that. And the other reason is that we have been developing for VR now for a year and a half, now close to 2 years. And we actually have gained so much experience that it gives us quite good head start when it comes to other developers who might jump the boat later on when VR is gaining more traction. So it's sort of like a half business reason as well to get advantage by being one of the first in there.
Right, good. Harald, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's probably a good time to start developing for it. If you put money on the line, that's a different question at the moment. But with VR, we have to avoid the kind of chicken and egg situations where the developers waiting for more headsets to be out there and people don't buy the headsets because there's not much software available. So I think it's a good way now to kind of keep the momentum and get people excited by showing more and more software that's kind of ready, so people actually want to get the headsets. And I think mobile VR is probably a bit of the first sector where we have like a critical mass of devices out there that makes it worse for people to start monetizing it.
Also, adding on this, I think the first time when the mobile phone got released, like in the late 80s, everybody thought like it's a technique that nobody's going to use ever, and see where we've come by now. Like virtual reality, augmented reality, all these kind of things are going to grow together more quickly and form a new thing that's already after VR. So it's just something that will eventually get accepted by the masses to a certain extent. And as I said, don't look at it now. Think about what you can do in 2 years with it, and how you can actually like promote your products with it differently than today.
And also, generally speaking, for games, it was never easier to get into game development than now. With all these engines almost free out there, floating around, with easy to learn programming, scripting languages like C#, it's totally awesome to make a game, and you can just prototype around and have a ready-to-play prototype in 2 or 3 days or so. Yeah, it's amazing now for when you start developing.
Excellent. Is there a final question from the audience? All right, yeah.
We've seen VR displays around 20 years ago already, and they were shown at a lot of exhibitions, and everybody that put it on the set was, oh, how cool is it, and I play Doom on it by myself, but they disappeared again. Why do you think nowadays it will be different? So why do you think it will be a mass market 1 to 2 years?
So obviously on the technology side, we have mobile phones coming up in the meantime, so they made the technology much cheaper, smaller, better. So we have a lot of advancement on that side. But then also, I think it's people's general acceptance with digitalization. So in the early 90s, people didn't have smartphones or the internet. And nowadays, we're just more accepting technology in our day-to-day life with wearables, carrying mobile phones around. So I think VR, back in the time in the early 90s or whenever they started, it's just the time wasn't right yet. So now the stars are aligned.
It's also the hardware foundation at the users. Like generally, we have more powerful machines in our pockets than we had in the 80s on the global on the whole planet. So you can just reach a new fidelity in VR, and you can just create new experiences that are believable. Something that wasn't present with Doom. It was a great idea to start it back then, but it failed because just the hardware foundation wasn't available at all.
And on the business side, Facebook is in it with 2 billion, Sony is in it, Valve is in it. What else do you need?
Samsung, HTC. Yeah, I mean,
Samsung
that doesn't guarantee its commercial viability and success, but it, certain momentum.
So also augmented reality, when that kicks in with whatever some companies have in stock there with Microsoft and Magic Leap, whatever that will be then. And augmented reality is just a subset of virtual reality, so they kind of work in parallel into different fields. So that can be quite interesting and can be actually the driving motor that pulls VR forward as well.
Excellent. All right, folks. Well, that's our panel for today. I mean, for those who are dabbling with VR or thinking about it, I mean, although the market isn't quite there yet, there have been developers out there working on it for the past year, or in some cases even 2 years. So don't be shy to connect with other developers and share the knowledge so we can explore the new medium and both create some really interesting games and experiences, but also new business and market opportunities as well. Thanks for coming, and thanks to our panel for sharing their knowledge.